And thank you all for joining us. So it says that Maximiliana is the Missouri Outreach Manager with a small business majority. And then if you will tell us something that we can't tell just by looking at you, that would be most helpful. So you can go ahead and fill that in. Hello to everybody else who's joined us. So if you were to meet me, what you can't tell by looking at me, but now you will all be able to know just because we're on this call, is that I am a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. I think that's kind of apparent. I've been to, I don't know how many concerts. People ask me that all the time, and I lost count. I know one year I did about, from rehearsal show to the last show, probably about 26 in a year. So, so there's that. I've been to about 20 states and 4 countries to see him. So that's something you can't tell just by looking at me. For Maximiliana, it says that let's see, something you can't tell is that I wish more attention was paid to Latino entrepreneurs in St. Louis. City is very focused on Black and white issues to the detriment of the Latino community here. So yes, I feel you. I think that we talk a lot about, and we'll have a discussion about that because I think it's really important. So what I'm going to ask is and I'll call on the next person who knows this game. So tell us something about you that I can't tell by looking at you, and tell us who you are so that other people get to know you, and then you'll call on somebody else, okay? So Hassan, tell us about you.
So Hassan, I live and work in Detroit, work with entrepreneurs in a variety of different areas. I've managed incubators, I've managed microloan programs, I've worked in traditional economic development, so kind of coming at this from a variety of different perspectives. So something that you wouldn't know. I worked for a while as a booking agent in the music business, and I actually represented heavy metal bands. And I will pop one over to Eric Isaac.
Hey. All right, so thank you, Hassan. I'm Eric Isaac. I live in South Florida. I work with Prospera, which is a statewide, national, we could say. We're in 2 states, and we help Hispanic-owned businesses to start or grow. We've done that for about 30 years, and our program is geared towards the immigrant Hispanics in the U.S. I work on fund development, although I've been on the programming side for a lot as well. But I now work on development. Something you don't know about me, but just looking at me, I work from home, so I cook and work. That's what I do throughout my day. I spend my time in the kitchen or working here at my station. And I'll give it to Tiffany.
That sounds delicious. I wish I could just cook all day. That sounds great. And work. Oh, not to say that you don't work hard also. But so my name is Tiffany Henry. I work at the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute here in Morrilton, Arkansas. I'm not sure how many people live in Morrilton. I live about 20 miles away, and my town has 27,000 people. So all of these communities are very small. What I do here is coordinate a program called Uncommon Communities, and we work with rural communities here to build leaders to make positive change and a positive impact. So it's essentially community building through entrepreneurship. And so that's really fun. A lot of great relationship building and connecting. And something about me that you wouldn't know by looking at me is I am the mother of a disabled son. And I love him very much. He was born with a brain abnormality that has affected everything about him. And so he takes up a lot of my personal life, but I wouldn't change a thing. He's great. So with that, Faye.
Yes, hi everyone. Can you hear me? I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Yeah, so I am Faye Horwit. I am the Vice President of Community Innovation for Forward Cities, and we do work roughly helping communities build inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems. We're working in now I think 9 cities across the country in different formats, whether it's through ESHIP communities, in partnership with Kauffman, and we also have 4 two-year accelerator programs we're running in cities across the country, and we also have a 6-month strategic planning process for communities who are trying to get themselves ready to do this work. And my background and focus has been on helping support ecosystems and ecosystem building for what I call underestimated entrepreneurs, with a focus on women, people of color, low-income neighborhoods, and low-tech. And something you wouldn't know about me by looking at me, and you can't see my picture either, so but I am a Black female, and people would not normally guess because of that I am a sci-fi geek. So a bit of a Trekkie, and I love all manners of sci-fi, television sci-fi. So there you go. I will throw it to, let's see who else. Is that Paula?
It's Paula. Thank you for pronouncing it correctly. You cannot see me, so I will introduce myself and also give you info about what you may not be able to know even if you could see me. I am the relationship manager at SourceLink in Kansas City. We work to stimulate entrepreneurship throughout the country. Some of you are familiar with SourceLink, and it started as Casey SourceLink in 2005, funded by the Kauffman Foundation. We have grown since then. Casey SourceLink has grown since then. We became US SourceLink and work with communities throughout the country, small rural communities as well as large communities. We are just working with the city of Chicago, connecting all of their resources for entrepreneurs and their support services for entrepreneurs, and working to build a very strong network of entrepreneurial support services to reach out to their entrepreneurs. So if you would like to know more about SourceLink, I'm happy to share that with you. I've been with SourceLink for almost 5 years, and my job is to work with our existing client base and solve problems and talk to them about how to even improve their networks. What you may not know, if you don't know me and you can't see me, but I am a person who's had a long career. That's to say that I am a mature adult. Of course, we're all mature adults, but I'm even more mature than, I'm older than probably most of you. But I have been an entrepreneur in my life, and I was a home-based single mother business owner at a time in the 80s and 90s where the support services that I received were from the SBDC, which was wonderful, but that was it. I was a micro enterprise and found that it was the only way to help raise my children and not be gone all day and pay exorbitant prices for daycare. And so it was difficult. And I actually was able to work in that way with subcontractors and virtual projects. I helped people publish books, and it worked out. But yes, I'm very sympathetic to folks who want to create a lifestyle business for lots of reasons, to support families or to be able to have flexible schedules, etc. So that's what I believe in. Thanks, and I'll pass it on. Who is missing? Area code 505. Is there somebody who hasn't spoken yet?
So Eric in 505, that would be Eric Ridswhitmore, who we just lost. And I think you scared him off. Let's go with Joe.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Bartman. I work with a small nonprofit based in South Dakota. We work to help support local economic development leaders in very rural, remote communities in our part of the country, and also work directly with some very rural entrepreneurs through a fellowship program. And I have so I live in a community of 500 people. So that's the kind of rural we're talking about. And here in our part of the country, there's, most of the communities we work with are somewhere between 500 and 5,000 people in those communities. So the kind of isolation and access to resources is difficult for a lot of the entrepreneurs out here. One of the things that you might not know about me by looking at me, might be surprising. I'll play off of what Faye shared. So I'm a big hip hop fan and have been since I was a teenager.
Okay, so pick somebody.
All right, I'll pass to Jenny.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Anderson. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I run an organization called Celebrate EDU, and we provide entrepreneurship education to people with disabilities. The majority of our students are people with developmental disabilities, and we provide different educational programs that help introduce them to the concept of what is entrepreneurship and how self-employment and entrepreneurship can be a great fit for many people with disabilities. Something you wouldn't know by looking at me is that I have a brother who's on the autism spectrum, and he's a huge inspiration and the reason I really started this organization. He is an entrepreneur and has written 2 books and is absolutely incredible. So I don't know who else hasn't gone yet, as I think I came on a little late. So pass to someone that hasn't had the chance yet.
Eric, we had called on you and you weren't there, so are you joining us again?
Yes, I am. So hi, everyone. Let's see, Eric Ridswhitmore. I'm with the City of Albuquerque in economic development and also technology and innovation. Variety of different ways of engaging with the community. Something you might not know by just looking at me, spent a while as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army. Jumped out of a bunch of different planes, helicopters, other kinds of aerial platforms, and I don't know, it was kind of interesting, another part of my life, but there you go. And I don't know who else might be on the call. So
let's go to Malika or Ben.
This is Ben, and I've already been successful early on the call earlier this week. I managed to hang up right about this time, so I'm already winning today. Organization BioSTL in St. Louis, our mission is to transform the region's economy around innovation and in particular medical and plant sciences. We've done some work around diversity, equity, inclusion, including a significant regional systems level equity lens effort funded by the Kauffman Foundation, of which Maximiliana is one of the greatest champions here in St. Louis. Thank you, Maximiliana. Something you might not know from looking at me, I was born and early on raised in rural, significantly under-resourced southern Minnesota, and more recently have spent most of my living in much more urban, often under-resourced communities in Chicago and Indiana, and some here in St. Louis. So it's in part, as was described, sort of the passion from others. It's in part from those varied experiences that is my passion around these issues of inclusion and equity and entrepreneurship.
Great. And Malika?
Hello, everybody. My name is Malika Robinson. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I guess everybody's telling kind of why they're involved with this. I started an organization a couple years ago called the Kansas City Black Co-working Community, with the goal of, one, since I was a self-employed person, to find other people that were also other Black people that were also self-employed. I had just learned about co-working, so I was really enthusiastic about that, and how I felt like it could be transformative for people of color in terms of sharing resources and best practices and learning from each other, as well as starting to support each other by, purchasing products and things like that. And then that turned into ESHIP Collaborative, which was a weekly kind of pop-up co-working that we did for about 10 months here in Kansas City. I shuttered that in October. And so I've been silent for a minute as we try to regroup and figure out what our next step is. I'm running in because I just looked at a building today. So that's why I'm out of breath and just jumping on the call. So we shall see what the next step is for Eastside Collaborative, but that's me. And what you might not, hi Faye, yeah. What you might not know about me by looking at me is that, I don't know what you won't know about me. I used to play violin. I was a very good violin player. I did that for most of my teenage years and young adult life, and probably should pick it up again. So, thanks.
Excellent. Okay, everybody went, right? Did I miss anybody? No? All right. So, as we move towards the ESHIP Summit, which if you don't have on your calendars yet, it is May 21st to the 23rd in Kansas City. If you have been to an ESHIP Summit before, then your invitation should be going out sometime next week. And then we open it up for everyone else. If you don't receive it by the week of the 21st, please let me know. You can always contact us so Christine and I, we share an email at eshipgoals@gmail.com. It's much easier. And then we both have our separate emails, but that's the one that will go to both of us. So we're talking about goal number 1, which is inclusive field. And I'm going to share the current iteration of what inclusive field looks like. The definition is something that was that came from drafts and edits and all kinds of input from about 800 people that we've talked to in the past 2 years. There is a little bit of a question under this, which is the one word, with a one sentence title, which I'd like to discuss with you here. So a couple of things that have been raised up is we talk about terms like undercatalyzed, underrepresented, underestimated. I mean, some of those terms that we've talked about here. When we talk about inclusive, I know that it's really important to talk about the fact that there are people that are not included. So I want you to think about this for a minute, and this is just open for discussion, and we have to talk about race in the United States. It is something that's paramount. We have to talk about gender. It's something that's been systemic and long-ranging and all of those things. To limit discussions on major identity markers, which would be the things that you can see, also puts a frame around the things that it becomes a focal point, and sometimes it's counter to the inclusive idea. So my question, and something that we discuss as I finish going over the rest of this, is, does focusing on differences reinforce differences, right? and how important, I mean, it's obviously very important. We all have to talk about diverse perspectives. We can't do the work without people from different perspectives. The question really is posed is how much do we want to point to the differences, which may or may not be considered counter to the whole idea of inclusion and to create a sense of belonging. So I'll let that hang for a minute while I tell you that currently under these goals, under this goal, there have been 3 initiatives that have been identified and raised up by the community, by the people around the ESHIP Summit, Kauffman Foundation, National Resource Providers, and the ESHIP champions, some of whom are on this call. And the ones that are listed aren't just the only ones that we'll be focusing on, but it's a good place to start. So we talk about diverse and inclusive board representation, a workshop in the Speakers Bureau, and there's Ecosystem Builder Accelerator. But we just had a call with ESHIP champions, and one of the things that we talked about was that maybe we would be talking about a fellowship as opposed to an accelerator per se. And Louisa's not on the call, but I know Tiffany was involved in that discussion. So can you share with everyone the idea about a fellowship as opposed to an accelerator, or Hassan?
I don't think I was part of that call. Was that just, I may have gotten off to get to the next.
Okay, yeah. So Hassan, can you give us a little color on that?
The idea was more to have a fellowship, which would be sort of like a cohort of individuals that would get together on a national level, because the incubator idea just didn't seem to fit with what we were trying to do. So the conversation leaned more toward having a fellowship of individuals that would go through a fellowship on ecosystem building. And I think the idea is basically you get people from cross-section from across the country, and then those people would eventually go back to whatever region they're from and help build out, even educate more people in what they went through, what they learned. I think that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, yes, great. So there are briefs behind those, and there are links to those in the email that I sent you. We have a unique opportunity, which I've shared with people that have been on other working group calls, is that people at the foundation, as well as national resource providers, have told us that they're going to help us in helping to fine-tune these briefs that we send in by giving us feedback while we're in the process. So seeing that the summit is in May, and I want you to think of the summit as basically a milestone point, but not the end, right? We're not going to solve for all of these things by the summit. There's this long-term work, and what you're seeing now is just a point where we stop and get together and assess and work and figure out what else is next. So thinking of that as just a point in time. So what we're going to work towards between now and that point in time is to come up with these initiatives, which have been raised up by the community as a good starting off point, to get them to a place where we can get funding and efforts and energy behind them. When we talk about an ecosystem builder speakers bureau, we're talking about a database of speakers that includes intentionally inclusive and diverse set of speakers from across the ecosystem building field. And that would be people in rural communities, people in government, people that represent incarcerated, formerly incarcerated people, people with disabilities. It's all of those things. And not just, it's not just a lens, but it's a cross-section. Does that make sense? And then the national resource providers in ensuring that there's diverse representation in the boards and being very intentional about having that happen. and then this accelerator, which is now more of a fellowship idea of getting together a cohort of ecosystem builders that that are representative of that cross-section community. So I let that really heavy thing hang. I don't know how people feel about the need or the use of the language around the term that we don't, the term that we still debate, right? Whether it's, somebody said something about new majority, and I thought, no, that's one I feel really awkward about, because I don't think it's a new majority. I don't think that I don't know that that's a thing, right? It's not like at one point that's going to be more people. I think it becomes less of us versus them or those other people. It's the pointing fingers. But I'm really curious to hear about the terms and the necessity for the terms. So I'm just going to open it up and let you talk.
I'll chime in. I don't know if it makes sense to define things to different people. So I'm grappling with if it makes sense to define what that is or to just leave it open.
Yeah, can I speak briefly to that? I know that the term inclusive has emerged as the sort of a commonly understood word to describe what we're talking about, as ecosystem building has been gaining prominence. I believe we have an opportunity and a responsibility to think about that really hard before we put that, we codify that and sort of set that in stone, even in terms of the name of this goal, because it's kind of taken for granted. But if you really think about what the word means, it's very one-sided. And this idea of being inclusive is wrapped around having to ask someone to let you or allow you, or to please, can we be a part, and can we sort of join in what's already existing as it stands. And that language for people who are already doing amazing, wonderful things, but are disconnected from that larger, broader ecosystem, that actually paints a very clear picture. And so for me, I don't want us to necessarily take for granted the fact that inclusive is the word that we want to start with.
Hi. Yeah, this is Paula, and I just wanted to jump on something that you were saying, Faye, and thank you. I'm sorry if I interrupted. But just recently, there was a conversation with a woman who had visual disabilities, and was talking about how to make our conferences more accessible to the community who needs additional resources to participate. And she really was very interesting and provided a lot of energy behind those terms. Diversity, we use a lot. Inclusive, we use a lot. But perhaps accessibility, accessibility is something that we can toss around a bit. We just want equal access. We want access, maybe not even use the word equal, just access to assistance to help build business. I'm reminded of conversation I had several years ago with one of our affiliates who had reached entrepreneurs, people who are interested in entrepreneurs through their library system. And I love that, because the library system is accessible to everyone. And the branches of a library reach out far into the community, even in rural communities. And one of my goals here at SourceLink is to reach out to as many libraries as I possibly can. And I know that Kaufman's been involved with this. So just using that as a visual, as a framework, you can think about accessibility and the branches of a library. That's all. Thanks.
Paul, I appreciate that. And one of the words as you were speaking that came to mind to me that perhaps is something we could explore because it has no limitations is open. An open field. I think that allows, or something like that, allows it to not be sort of stymied into one direction or another, but allows anyone who feels like that they want to belong to feel like they're a part, and it allows it to continue to grow to all kinds of participants and anyone who's interested to be a part of this work, even people groups that we may not even know about yet, or this idea that it's always open to all could be interesting. And I will add to that one of the reasons why I think it's necessary is you brought up, Cecilia, this idea of belonging and whether or not talking about race and calling out these gender types of things adds to the problem. And I would say it does not, but I also think we don't want to negate the need for people to belong with groups that are like-minded and like them, that there's a strength that comes from being with those that share your same challenge or barrier or assets, or and we don't want to say that that's bad. I think that there's room for that as well.
I totally agree. I think that we talk about, when I do diversity inclusion work, so DEI work, my lens is about belonging, or creating that sense of belonging. And we talk about I think in the last Kaufman video I said something to the effect, it was the Verna Myers quote, where you talk about diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, belonging is dancing like no one's watching. So I think that stems back to the work that Kenji Yoshino does over at NYU, talking about covering and how we do so much to assimilate to a culture, and that's a detriment, because all the energy that you use to assimilate to the situation where you're not feeling like you belong creates a barrier. It's counterproductive and all of those things. So I think that yes, belonging is. There was a conference that I was at. So here's some pushback towards the major identity markers, because the major identity markers are there because it's what we see. It's also, as Faye said, very comforting to see people. I know that when I'm in a 1 Million Cups community and I see more women, I see leaders that are women, leaders that are people of color, I feel a lot more comfortable than if it was predominantly one lens of person, right? So at the same time, I know when we've done, there was a book group that I belonged to for a little while, and we had people who identified as white who read a book called Witnessing Whiteness. I think some people have read Invisible Backpack, Unpacking the Invisible Backpack, while people who identified as a person of color read Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. There's a reason that we caucus those groups, so that you could speak in a way that you would feel more comfortable without having to put on that cover, or without having to adjust your language, because you were around people that were like you and didn't and were able to openly discuss. So to Faye's point, there is a comfort, there is a need for people to be able to come together around that. So Malika, you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just, as I hear, I definitely understand the idea of not calling out the visible markers. I think the challenge for me with this particular goal is that there already is a power differential in the systems that are already set up for economic development, right? So we already have EDCs and corporations and nonprofit that are already probably majority ran by people that don't have as much inclusiveness or are not as diverse. And so the purpose of this goal, the intention of this goal is to, while we're building out this field, is to be very intentional that in order to address the needs of populations that typically have not been included, those people need to be leaders of that field. So it's not really about it's open and it's available for everyone to participate. It's about we need to be intentional about how we're placing people in positions, how we're building organizations, and making sure that we have diverse opinions in there. And so I think when we're talking about the general entrepreneurial community, I agree with kind of the idea about openness and not really talk, we don't have to call out those markers. But when we're talking about leadership, we have to be clear, because oftentimes if we're not, we miss the mark, and we have done it over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ben. That very much resonates with me, thinking back to some of the conversations we had in the sort of breakout sessions at the last ESHIP, where some of these concepts are around the fellowship or the board leadership kinds of efforts. It was very much about intentionality toward inclusion and understanding what equity and ecosystem building looks like. So I would certainly concur with what Malika laid out.
This is Joe. I would add to that. I was also sort of thinking, while Malika was talking, it sparked something in me about, like, a lot of the words we've been talking about so far, open and inclusive and accessible, are about, again, about the people who are already in the group opening the door to others. And so what the word that popped in my head when Malika was speaking was empowered, because it's kind of flips it around the other direction. It says the people who are not already in the group, we're giving them power to be the group, to create the group, or co-create the group, whatever that group is, instead of saying you can come in and be like us if you want.
I love that, and I love the fact that if we're going along that path, is there a step even further, which is it's not about those who have been excluding. It's about more than those that have not been invited. It's beyond it. It's also about healing that divide. And so there's a word that I use often, rock around these kinds of things, and that's regenerative. And that is about not only addressing the needs of both sides of that conversation, but also in the coming together of the two and the creation of something new. Can you heal what has been previously broken and misunderstood, and create a third thing, right? That's even better.
So I think, Faye, the work that you folks have done with the innovation councils with Forward Cities, I mean, that's awesome the way you just described it, because I think you guys have been really intentional bringing people in from different neighborhoods that weren't, different industries, people who were basically doing work at the grassroots level, but bringing them into leadership positions, and also having conversations where you've brought those groups together about, when you just talked about the healing piece, but talking the racial equity training that you guys have done as part of that. I think that could really inform what we're doing with these three initiatives.
So what we're finding in the work, Hassan, thank you for saying about what we're finding is, as we're going to communities and beginning to have these conversations, people on both sides are a bit shocked and a bit taken aback that we're actually having the conversation. They're so used to avoiding the topic and to having it be one-sided conversation on one side or the other, that bringing stakeholders and grassroots community and leaders, their leaders in the same spaces to have these conversations is in and of itself healing. It's the beginning of healing. And so I think that there's rather than us trying to think about something that we have to fix, I think maybe we can think about it as what are we really trying to create? What is this new thing that doesn't exist yet that we want to try and get to? And that's the feedback we're getting from people, is that they never thought that they would be invited to the table to have the conversation. And so they have hope for something that can be and look like something they've never seen before.
Isaac, what do you think? Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with the analogy you did. The thing is clever. The one with the dancing without, them seeing you, because groups are different, and they identify with their own types. I mean, we see it a lot in the Hispanic community, and how, I mean, in Florida it's easier for them to merge with other groups or in already existing ecosystems, because they're majority. If you want to see it, in some places of the state, they are majority, but in other places, although they're already, important amounts in percentages of the population and growing, they're completely segregated, and so the barriers that have been there, historically there, are just being added to the list of other barriers, and so there are states where you say, it's incredible how people don't know where Venezuela is at, or what that Venezuela is a country, and things like that, and you have over 200, 300,000 Venezuelans coming to the U.S. Every month probably, and they're gonna start businesses. It's the first thing they're gonna do. They're not gonna get a job, and they're gonna get a job after they fail if they don't get the help. But yeah. So they'll like to going back to your analogy. They'll like to dance. They'll like to dance. I don't know if they're gonna be comfortable in people seeing them dancing. They're gonna dance anyways, but it'd be nice if they can dance, like you said, and not feeling that they're seeing them. And however, the biggest challenge is, are they dancing the right music? So, and that's our job here when it comes to include them, because entrepreneurship is totally different. In different communities, it is, and the way it's done is different. But there's one way to do it, and that's I have to agree. The right way to do it, because you're in America. If you want to do entrepreneurship in Turkey or in Asia, it probably varies, or it's probably different. Although the principles are the same, but yeah, it's very important to identify those things in the different groups to have them included.
So now, Jenny, you're, you brought up an interesting point. One of the things is, especially with people that are on the autism scale, you can't tell by looking at them sometimes, right? So that's when we talk about major identity markers and this other stuff. So there's, for those of you who have seen that that diversity iceberg, where we talk about the things that are visible, but it's the stuff underneath the water that'll sink your ship, is the stuff that you can't see. And I've had people say to me, that's not my main thing, right? So, so what do you hear when we talk about this stuff?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. I think when we were talking about accessibility, when that word was brought up, I feel like that's something that is not included in these conversations as much as it should be necessarily. And I think accessibility looks so different to each and every person with a disability. So we were talking about a person with a visual impairment, and that's going to be totally different than making something accessible to a person on the autism spectrum. And the spectrum is so vast that I think there's so much we have to still learn. I'm still learning every day. You know, I have a brother on the autism spectrum, but the saying in the autism community is, if you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because every single person is so different. And a lot of times, something that we work on a lot is the self-advocacy and understanding the needs. And I don't think that's very often developed in a lot of people. And I think there's still so much we have to learn about the autism community to keep them included in these types of conversations, as well as people with a wide variety of disabilities as well. So I think, you know, it isn't a visual disability. People meet my brother all the time and they say to him, you don't look like you have autism, but there is no physical sign that there's no physical attributes to an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. So it is something that is very difficult to navigate. And I don't know if I completely have the answer, but I do think it's something that I love that you said that, because to bring awareness to the fact that it's something we have to think about, because, you know, these differences that people have aren't visual most of the time. And it's something really hard to navigate, but making sure, I think the more, you know, using the word open, accessible, empowered, I think can start opening that door as much as possible.
So all of you have gotten the email that I sent out with the language. Is there something that we're missing? I know that, you know, we could be here for a really long time to define all of the things that we want to include. And we do have to start somewhere, right? So this is a draft. We're going to share and we're going to move forward. But I think that it's really important for the work that we do to be very intentional. I know Faye has some interest in doing the work around the Speakers Bureau. And one of the things that we discussed recently was it's such a propensity for people to find diverse, like major identity marker diverse people to speak about diversity and inclusion, right? So if you are, so Louisa was on a call recently, and Louisa Shepherd is Black, and as a Black woman, people may ask her to talk about what it is around race and those barriers, but she's a data geek. So that's what she wants to talk about. She doesn't want to, not that she doesn't want to talk about it. She says the time that she would talk about those things is when she's really upset and there's steam coming out of her ears. That's the time when she talks about race, right? So, but her go-to discussion, the thing that she's an expert on, is data. So when we create this speaker bureau, or the opportunities for speaking, that we don't pigeonhole people and we don't put them into a slot because, oh, can you talk? Because how many times have you, person of color who's on this call, been asked to speak on behalf of all your people? Like, I don't know what that looks like, right? So,
Cecilia, yeah. I am so excited to hear you say that, because if you read the brief that was created, it actually does not say that. It actually is tweaked towards people who speak on the topic of only of diversity and inclusion. And what I wanted to bring up on this call was that seems very narrow to me, and it seems to actually be going against the grain of what we would hope to model for the rest of the sector. So that's thrilling to me. So I'm excited to rewrite that towards that.
That would be great. I would love that. And I would love for anybody who wants to collaborate with Faye to lend that voice. I think it's really important, right? So you have all these people that are on this call right now. You have so many things about you that people just can't tell by looking at you. So so let's make that apparent. You know, one of the we have to, as I said earlier in the call, we have to talk about race. It is the sin of systemic things that have been put in place for the couple of hundred years that this country has been around, right? So we can't get away we can't move towards equity without talking about that and without including that in the discussion. It's the same thing with gender. You know, as we get ready to celebrate the 100 years, those quote unquote 100 years that women could vote in this country. First of all, this country was around 100 years before that, right? So we forget that. And then we forget the fact that it's not 100 years since all women could vote in the United States. If you were Asian, if you were a Black woman, if you were Native American, you could not vote until the 60s. So that's a really big fallacy that we perpetuate by celebrating, you know, a milestone that's not inclusive of everyone. So keeping those things in mind. I had a conversation with Andy recently, and we talked about the fact that, yes, you know those statistics, and you know those statistics are horrible because we measure those statistics. We don't measure other statistics. And so while this is top of mind and it needs to be, there are things that we don't talk about either. So the last Inclusion Open last year, where the Kauffman Foundation was granting money for Inclusive Open, there were over 700 applications. There were 2 that dealt with disabilities. That's a problem, right? So having representation and having things that we have to be mindful of are going to be really important in doing this work. And this goal is infused in all the other goals as well. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Yes.
I just want to say something really quickly, which I really appreciate that conversation about, you know, I think what we've talked a lot about, and I don't want to completely go off on a complete tangent, but I think we also have to remember that there's so much intersectionality with disability that is often not talked about. 1 in 5 people in the US has a disability, so it's a huge majority of people. So as we're talking about people with disabilities being a group, I also want to make sure that we are thinking about how they are part of everyday life for everyone. More people, we need to be talking about it, just like you said. 2 people out of 700 is absolutely crazy, and we were one of them. So yeah, just it's really cool to have that as part of this call for me. Just wanted to share.
Cecilia, I also wanted to throw something out there and ask a question as well. I know that there is a storytelling component for all this work that sort of runs all through all of the goals. And so when you say things like inclusion should be baked into all of the goals, I'm wondering if there is anyone paying attention to across the board, all the goals, how that is playing itself out, and is it playing itself out across the goals?
Well, that's a good question for ESHIP champions to answer, right? So I've got a couple of ESHIP champions that are on the call. I think the blessing of having all of you is that you're able to now see this overarching view. Because when we focus on goal work, we're almost siloed in that we focus on the work of that particular goal, and they've had the opportunity to kind of look around. So if somebody would share some of that, and then I think Joe wants to say something. So are we looking at the goals? So that's Tiffany.
Yes, it takes me a second to always find that unmute button. No, Faye, that's an excellent question. And in the discussions that we have had together recently, everything has been intertwined, at least with the champion group. Everyone talks to everyone else, and so the storytelling component and a lot of these components, there's been so much acknowledgement of those collisions and those overlaps, where when it comes even to the initiatives, a lot of them aren't even, you know, they're housed in a specific goal, but they're still going to touch and reach all of the other ones. And we were talking earlier today about when you even present the goals to people, it's not a linear process. They're all happening all at the same time. And so I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but yes, the hope, as I understand it, is that, yes, storytelling is woven into all of these goals, and to just get the word out of who are the people that are championing any of these areas, and what is their background, and why are they doing it, and what message do they want to share to the world about ecosystem building. And yeah, does that answer your question?
And I think what Faye was also saying, that, correct me if I'm wrong, Faye, is that are we looking at inclusion as we're looking at quantified methods? Are we looking at inclusion when we talk about collaborative culture? Is that right?
That's right. So making sure that that's being considered across all the goals, and is there someone specifically paying attention to that and ensuring that's happening? And also from a leadership perspective, who's leading? Are we ensuring that in each of these goals is leading the work, that there is equitable representation, equitable and diverse representation of leadership as we're doing this work? Because to Malika's point, if we're not modeling that, we can't exactly try and tell people that that's the way that they should do it.
I think that's one of the things that we have to be mindful of when we share who, when we called up people and had people nominate to be ESHIP champions, there was a mindfulness in trying to make sure that we had representation, whether it was rural versus urban versus education, government, people of color, all women. We tried to be really mindful of that. And that's a really hard lens, right? Because you have to be mindful and you have to make sure it's not tokenism. So it's that really fine line of, but there were people that were doing the work. There are people that are still doing the work. They're here on the calls, and I appreciate all of them. So I wanted to give Joe an opportunity to speak, and then we'll wrap up because we're over the hour. So.
Thank you very much for the time. So quick, I had two quick questions. One, is there an opportunity or a way to plug in if you're interested in working on one of the initiatives that were listed?
So you are absolutely, anybody is open to, there's a link, there's a click on it. What we'll do is I will email everybody back that was on this call. And so you will have each other's email addresses if you'd like to collaborate. I don't like to send that all out until you've actually had some interaction. I think it's weird and creepy if I just share everyone's email address. So that's my goal, is to make sure that those things are in place. But yes, absolutely, they're open documents, and that's what we'd like to do. And your other question?
So it maybe is more of a suggestion than a question, but just, I think that it's also important, or it can be just as important in these kinds of conversations about inclusion and diversity and access, to look at it, or to be bold enough to talk about this, not always from the who's being left out, but what are the systemic advantages that are built in for some, and to be naming those and pointing to those so that we can begin to break down those sort of advantages that are built into the system. Does that make sense? So not always like, how are we opening more doors, but how are we also looking at the ways that there's an easy path for people who happen to look like me, an easier path, right? and being bold enough to say those things out loud. And because I think without that, sometimes a whole big part of the system is blind to the problem. If we can't point to how they are experiencing an advantage or more access or whatever it might be.
I think that's great. That's really important. And there are things that you can say that some of us can't, right? So if you say them, you're not the angry brown person. So I know that I take up a lot of space, and I'm more apt to say something, but I don't get into some of those rooms. So so that's an opportunity, and we need advocates and allies to be able to do that. So that's really important. So just to be mindful of everyone's time, I will email. What I'd like to do is be able to wait until I have this video to share, and I'll email it back out. But I'm happy to share everyone's email contact so that you can. And in the meantime, feel free to go into those links and add your thoughts to all of them. And if I can have all of you who are remaining on the call, if you can give us one word as a checkout, that would be great. So let's start with Tiffany.
Hope.
Pick someone.
Joe.
I feel welcomed. And I'll go to Malika because she was really eager to share something. But you're on mute.
I was, but I only get one word. Okay, let's just say excited. Oh, I gotta pick somebody. Faye.
Wow. That's a word. Let's see. How about Hassan?
Grateful. And Jenny?
Well, a couple of you took my words, but I'll go with excited as well. Oh, and I will choose Eric.
So open. And I will choose who's missing.
Maximiliana.
Maximiliana, yeah.
Oh, and she says connected. All right.
Oh,
so yes. Everyone went, right? Great. Thank you. And me, I am grateful as well. I'm always inspired and empowered by all of you. So thank you so much for being here, doing the work, having difficult conversations, because this is not easy, but I can't think of a better group of people to do it with. So thank you. And we will be in touch.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye.